I said in my worst episodes of Supernatural video that I thought that the show had an uneven quality, and I listed off the episodes that I considered to be the weakest. Now I would like to talk about the episodes that I think are the best, going season by season. If I were to do a top 10 or even top 20 list of Supernatural's greatest episodes, I would have to make some really painful cuts. Supernatural has 228 episodes and counting. That's a lot of material to wade through. Also, it's a bit hard to compare episodes across multiple seasons since some of the seasons of this show are very clearly stronger than others. In lieu of a top whatever list of all of Supernatural's episodes, I'm going to instead rank the 7 best episodes from each season, starting with season 1. Before I begin, let me tell you the tale of how the show came to be. Supernatural has kind of a weird development history. The characters and concepts with many TV shows are intertwined from the word go. For example, Star Trek, in all of its incarnations, as being a bunch of morality plays about social issues the writers wanted to comment on, is reinforced by its characters being of diverse races and backgrounds who work together to solve or comment on the social issue. But with Supernatural, the concept of driving through a horror movie every week came long before Sam and Dean were created. Eric Kripke loved urban legends as a kid and spent years trying to pitch a story about them, both as a movie and a TV show. At one point, there was going to be a tabloid reporter that went around the country investigating local legends. Yeah, the WB really didn't like that idea, so Kripke came up with the Winchester brothers, the studio liked it, and you know what happened next. Kripke claims On the Road, Hellblazer, and horror movies, especially from Asia, as being his inspirations for Supernatural, and these influences present themselves in the series. The other main influences, besides Star Wars, Ghostbusters, the Evil Dead series, and other Gen X sacred cows of pop culture, are the X-Files and the Buffyverse. Supernatural, like the X-Files, has a season structure that has both myth arc episodes where most of the plot happens and Monster of the Week episodes. Also, how the monsters are introduced each week in the cold opening by killing an innocent victim is very emblematic of the X-Files. The influence from Joss Whedon is a little more subtle. One of the reasons why Buffy the Vampire Slayer was such a groundbreaking series was its mixture of tones and genres. Buffy, and its spin-off Angel, is scary, funny, romantic, heartbreaking, full of action, and it can be all of these things in one episode. Hell, it can be all of these things in one scene. Interestingly enough, this is now pretty much the norm for genre television shows aimed at teen and young adult audiences, and Supernatural is no exception. For this reason, when I first started watching the show, I thought it was especially derivative, having an identity cobbled together from more interesting material, unique style aside. While I now applaud Jared, and especially Jensen, for anchoring these characters and this story in a human place and therefore giving us, the audience, a reason to care, I still think Supernatural had the problem of unoriginality to overcome, finding its voice and feet as the season went on. Another issue I take with the series in the first season is that it wasn't terribly deep. With a few exceptions that we'll get to, don't worry. The writers and producers just didn't seem at all interested in playing with any big ideas, philosophical points, commentary on social issues, thematic arcs, or even messages to impart about its characters and therefore people in general beyond family is important for both our heroes and villains, which isn't a bad idea to play around with, to be sure, but it doesn't exactly make for rich, varied characters when all of their motivations are so uniform. The writers weren't always interested in giving the characters terribly realistic dialogue either. The as you know conversations are pretty bad in this season. I think this is easily the weakest season of Kripke's era, but there are some genuinely great hours of television in here because when so much love and effort is put into something, it shows. Now here comes the positivity. Here's my top 7 best episodes of Supernatural's first season. Number 7. I pointed out in my worst episodes video that the writers of Supernatural have a preoccupation with giving commentary on stories. Why they're important and powerful, why we tell them, and occasionally what a bitch being a storyteller for a mainstream TV show can be when coming up against the suggestions and mandates made by your corporate overlords. And there is one episode in the first season where the creative voices behind it clearly wanted the audience to think deeply about stories and fiction. Hell House was written by Trey Calloway and directed by Chris Long. Both of these men were only involved with this one episode of Supernatural, and I haven't seen that much of their other work. Long's directed a lot of TV shows I've at least heard of, if not seen, including doing an episode of Roswell. As for Calloway, same kind of deal. I did watch Revolution, but if a towering force of personality like Ben Edlund barely showed his voice in the series, then I'm not sure how much Calloway's ideas and voice were present in the series either. However, this episode of Supernatural is awesome, so Calloway has that in his favor at least. The reasons why I like this episode are simple. It's based on an intriguing notion about how people can believe in stories so much that they become real, and also it's funny. For the first reason, we have both the text and the directing enforcing the idea of how urban legends become legends. People, especially young people, hear about a story from others and then it takes on a life of its own. The story is a constantly changing thing, where a giant game of telephone makes the story look nothing like what it did when it was first created. Fiction is like that. You can't put the genie back in the bottle once it's released. This idea of things that are made real because we believe in them can go even bigger to religion or even secular aspects of our society like money. Money only exists because we all collectively agree that it's real. Basically, the big idea at work here is the anthropological definition of culture, something any social scientist can appreciate. As I said before, this episode is amusing. Jared and Jensen are good comedic actors, and the prank war is very emblematic of what brothers do, so it feels real. They also play very well off of Ed and Harry's actors. I know some people hate the Ghostfacers, but they managed to make me laugh, which is what they were designed to do. If there are any characters in Supernatural that resist a deeper analysis on any level, before Thin Man at least, it would be Ed and Harry. I know some people think that they represent who the writers thought the audience would be or is, but I just don't see it. I see comic foils to Sam and Dean that Calloway thought would never be in an episode again after this one. If they were meant to have a deeper meaning up front, I imagine they'd learn something once faced with real monsters or be killed off for their ignorance. However, at the end of the episode, they just keep on keeping on being nerdy weirdos. Solid premise, solid delivery, and laughs to make it a good time is how I'd sum up Hell House. Number 6. I've always been outspoken about the fact that I like the recurring characters on this show better than Sam and Dean. However, what usually makes these characters so interesting is how they interact with the Winchesters and compare and contrast to them. It's really satisfying to watch a character gel with the boys, both together and individually. Providence was written by David Ehrman and directed by Phil Segresha. Ehrman only wrote this one episode of Supernatural, and I've never watched any of his other work. Segresha, on the other hand, has been a producer of Supernatural since the beginning and has directed 33 episodes of the show up until this point. And there's a bunch of great ones on that list too, like Justin Bello, Abandon All Hope, Time After Time, and of course fan fiction. What makes Segresha such a good director is his eye for detail concerning the characters. For example, establishing the fact that Sam and Dean don't belong at the auction before we actually see them with the cars is a brilliant way to display that. How the boys react to not belonging is also interesting to watch. Sam is trying to fit in, but Dean is preempting any discomfort by acting way more unrefined than usual, saying with his actions, You rich snobs are not going to make me feel bad about myself, fuck you. Watching Sam and Dean in this episode is generally satisfying because it's all about Dean encouraging Sam to move on from his pain from Jessica, which might not be the most sensitive way to go about it, true, but it's from a genuine place of love. I also really like their understated reaction to that weird disco motel room. So the character moments and growth are the big reason why I like this episode so much, and Sarah is very much included in that. I honestly like her the most out of all of the women in Sam's life. She was funny, smart, brave, and quick-witted. She knew her own mind and what she wanted out of life. She and Sam had a good relationship based on empathy and understanding, as well as chemistry between the actors. However, she also fit with Dean. Dean liked her and thought that she was good for Sam and also respected her for her bravery. Honestly, I would have liked to watch the three of them solve more cases together, but you know, she had sex with Sam, so that marks her for death. In any case, we got Sarah for at least one really good episode. Number 5. To explain why I like my number 5 so much, I feel like I need to recap all of the reasons why I don't like Hookman. It's uninspired and unoriginal. The girl the plot is based around is bratty and judgmental. It reveals nothing new about Sam and Dean's characters, and there's some unfortunate implications. And pretty much everything that Hookman gets wrong, Bloody Mary gets very right. For example, Supernatural's Bloody Mary has some depth to her. She was murdered by her boyfriend and spent her last moments trying to expose him. So as a ghost, she goes after people who have secrets that have got others killed as revenge. She wasn't a monster in life, but circumstances made her a monster in death. The Hookman, on the other hand, is a monster full stop, because in life he was a moralizing asshole who laid God's smack down on anyone who dared follow their earthly desires, and then in death found other moralizing assholes to continue the killing. Bloody Mary was directed by Peter Ellis. Its story was by Eric Kripke, and the teleplay was by Terry Hughes and Ron Milbauer. I don't know much about these guys, but they did have more contact with Supernatural beyond this episode. Ellis also directed The Benders, and Milbauer and Hughes, who seem to always work together, came up with the story for Wendigo. The people who worked on this episode were obviously inspired by the Japanese horror film The Ring and its American remake, but they added their own twist to it to make Mary genuinely scary. She can kill you literally anywhere because we're surrounded by reflective surfaces. The creative team took full advantage of this premise to give a sense of real danger and fear. The person who is in danger in this episode is Charlie, who is one of the very few characters in the entire series who is actually smart enough to figure out that Sam and Dean aren't who they say they are. I like Charlie a lot because while she is a damsel, she was put in that position through no fault of her own. She tries to warn her friends, but they don't believe her. She also helps the boys solve the case, thereby giving herself agency and working against her own victimhood. This episode also advances the plot and Sam's character arc. We learn that Sam had a vision of Jessica's death. You can't lift this episode out, and none of its character beats are repeats of what came before or what will be more handily dealt with after. I love this little speech at the end that Sam gives Charlie, where he gives her the advice that he wishes he could heed himself. There was a bit of dropped plot here since Dean's eyes also bled and we never learn what person died because he kept a secret, but beyond that, there's nothing I don't love about Bloody Mary. Number 4. After watching Revolution, I believe that I can observe something about Eric Kripke as a storyteller that I just didn't quite grasp before. Kripke is very enamored with the cool, badass, beer-drinking, womanizing, cut off from all of his emotions, all-American male, stoic archetype. But he also knows that this image is total crap. No man is really like that, and the struggle between the perfect picture of masculinity men wish they were and who they actually are is basically Dean's entire character. His macho swagger is the armor that he wears to hide a person who's desperate for love, both familial and romantic. This duality between the mask and Dean's inner self makes him a very compelling character to endlessly study and analyze, as well as praise. I'm much more of a Dean girl than a Sam girl, so of course I needed at least one Dean-centered episode on the list. Something Wicked was written by Daniel Knauf and directed by Whitney Rasnick. Both of these people only worked on this one episode of Supernatural. Rasnick hasn't directed anything else I've watched, and Knauf is mostly unknown to me. However, he did write 2 episodes of Spartacus and produced it for a season, so that definitely counts in his favor in my book, as does this episode. I can't deny Dean is like 90% of the reason why I love this. Jensen is a great actor, and he really takes the audience on his journey. We're with him every step of the way. From his guilt about the sick kids, anger at the Striga, and his empathy with Michael. The actor who plays young Dean, Ridge Kenny, also hits all the right notes, letting the audience see a character that was a child who had an adult role hoisted on him way too early. We see that Dean is still a caretaker to Sam above all. At the end of the episode, Sam wishes he could not know about the things that go bump in the night. And Dean doesn't wish to gain his own innocence back, only that Sam could have it too. This episode is truly essential to understanding Sam and Dean's relationship, as well as Dean's relationship with John, clearly not Father of the Year material. Other reasons to love this episode include the scene with the boys coming in to kill who they think is the Striga, but who just turns out to be an old lady. The tension generated before the reveal only makes it funnier. Very good red herring. I also love the Simpsons reference of Sam listing off the monorail cities.
Before that, there was Ogdenville. Before that, North Haverbrook and Brockway.
I've sold monorails to Brockway, Ogdenville, and North Haverbrook, and by gum, it put them on the map.
Having the boys know who the monster is up front so that they can take the time they use to investigate the case on character development is a welcome and refreshing change. Number 3. I've said many times that continuity is not the biggest concern of Supernatural's creators and never has been, and this very much includes the monsters, but vampires have stayed pretty consistent. The only thing that I think that we've lost from their first appearance in Dead Man's Blood is the glowing eyes. Not really sad to see those go. This episode was directed by Tony Warmby, who only directed this one episode of Supernatural. He's directed and produced a lot of TV shows, most of which I've only ever heard of, but he did direct and produce some episodes of The X-Files, so that's cool. This episode was written by John Scheiben and Catherine Humphries. Humphries started her career writing for Supernatural and wrote or co-wrote episodes into the 4th season, pretty much all of them being well received by the fandom at large. Scheiben was a writer and producer for Supernatural's first 2 seasons. He's also responsible for his fair share of gems, this one included. I really like Supernatural's take on vampires as being part of a dying race and having to deal with that reality. This even gets expanded on in later episodes. Generally, the draw of telling stories about vampires, besides their sexual appeal, is the fact that as your more popular mythic creatures go, they're usually just as human as they are monsters. They kill people, often wantonly, but their goals and desires are usually very easy to understand, even empathize with. Luther cares more about Kate and his pack's lives than he does about getting revenge. Kate goes after Elkins in the first place because of what he did to Luther's family. I can understand them as characters, not just as villains, which always makes for a richer, more complex story. We also get character insight into Sam, Dean, and John. Look, I'm very much in the John did his best, but his best was nowhere near good enough camp. I do think that his character is more complex and sympathetic than a lot of people, especially from the Destiel side of the fandom, give him credit for, and this episode speaks to that. John even admits in a roundabout way that he wasn't the best parent, not thinking about what Sam and Dean wanted over his obsession to keep them safe. However, he still very much loved his children. He just wasn't equipped to love them in a healthy way after his wife died, especially Dean. The only time Dean says anything to John that isn't a "yes, sir" is when he tells John to back off after his fight with Sam, and interestingly enough, John listens. Dean clearly acted as a go-between for them for years. We see that John and Sam are often too much alike to be able to bend to the other's wishes, and that's actually in the text of the episode. Sam's behavior can be read as quite childish, as if he's disagreeing just because he can. However, he just wants John's respect, and for Dean and him to be recognized as adults, which is very understandable considering what the two of them accomplished that year together. And at the end of the episode, John recognizes that Sam was right. I'm a sucker for character-driven stories, and this episode succeeds in that type of storytelling in a clever and satisfying way. Number 2. I guess it's actually really redundant to say that Supernatural has similarities to the X-Files, because, I mean, of course it does. Most TV shows, genre TV shows especially, of the past 25 years owe something to the X-Files, either in its use of serialized storylines, grand mythology plots, black-on-black cinematography, slow-burn romance, or its enthusiasm for experimentation. I don't think the influence of X-Files can ever be oversold, and there is one episode of Supernatural that is the most X-Files episode to not actually be an X-Files episode, and since I am such a fan, of course I love it. Scarecrow was directed by Kim Manners. Its story is by Patrick Sean Smith and teleplay by John Scheiben. Smith only did the story for this one episode, and I don't know any of his other work. Scheiben worked on Supernatural and also The X-Files from its 3rd season until the very end. And this episode of Supernatural basically is Our Town or Die Hände die Verletzt, the latter of which was Kim Manners' first X-Files episode. He went on to direct 51 more episodes, by the way. Some other X-Files bits in here is William B. Davis as a shady college professor and this orchard location, which was also used in Schizogeny. You know, I honestly wish Supernatural had more episodes like this, where the whole town is in on it and there's a conspiracy to protect the monster, but we got at least one great episode out of that premise, so I can't complain. Anyway, even though the monster of the week is totally X-Files, the character moments are definitely Supernatural. This scene at the beginning has so many levels. The mood quickly changes with John from consoling and soft to barking orders at Sam and Dean. I love the parallel between Dean and Meg because it makes Meg's character more intriguing and gave this episode a clever bookend. This scene in the car also hits so many emotional notes where the audience can agree with Sam because Dean sounds like a mindless soldier. However, Sam is also acting like a brat. It shows Sam's age as not quite being an adult yet. I mean, come on, Sam, people are dying. However, Sam later sees that he made a mistake by leaving the one person who has always been there for him comes back. The girl who is betrayed by her family gets to be the one to deliver the final blow and therefore gets the power that was taken from her back, and then we get the thesis statement of the show. Sam and Dean are stronger together than they are apart. What can I say about this episode? It's just the loveliest combination of beautiful directing, great character writing, and plot building to make a perfect delivery of its premise. Before giving my number 1, here's some episodes I think deserve mention, if not a place on my list. The pilot is very good, just not a big favorite of mine. It's true that David Nutter is probably the best director in the television industry currently working, and this episode looks great. There's a lot of funny and quotable lines, and I think that it's charming that the show's love affair with the blood spatter started here, but as is the case with all episodes written by him in the first season, Kripke showed his, at the time, relative inexperience and weaknesses right off the bat, not only in the overly wordy and obvious dialogue, but we also see evidence of his problem with writing women. He never even bothered to give Jessica anything close to a personality, thus making the reasons Sam was with her a complete mystery. This is a problem for the entire first season in general. It's hard to feel sad about Jessica's death when we don't know why Sam loved her or what their relationship was like. So yeah, just not a great episode overall. Dead in the Water is an episode I like for similar reasons as I do Something Wicked, but it just doesn't hit me as hard. Something Wicked had much higher emotional stakes than Dead in the Water, making it the superior episode. Masterful directing by Kim Manners and Amy Acker's performance aside. Fun fact, Amy, like Jensen, is also from Dallas.
Okay, y'all are talking Elizabethan crazy talk.
I think Skin is a really uneven episode. On the one hand, it's great because it gives us all this important insight into Dean's character as someone who doesn't believe he deserves love and is terrified of abandonment. I also want to give a shout out to the guy who directed it, Robert Duncan McNeil, because he's awesome and played Tom Paris. All that being said, there are too many contrived moments. Like, you're honestly telling me that the brothers didn't know better than to separate when hunting a goddamn shapeshifter? Plus, Sam shouldn't have told Becky that Dean was a cop because he was pre-law, and therefore should have known that it would mess up his friend's case. Also, we don't really get a handle on the shifter as a character. Why does he assault all those women? I guess it's because he's a monster, but no other shifters in the series have ever done that. He was a very weakly conceived character. I struggled with whether or not I was going to put Devil's Trap on the list. The world is a truly lesser place without Kim Manners, not only because this episode is beautifully composed, but because Manners could almost always get the performance he needed out of all of the actors involved in every scene, and Jensen just kills it. He plays Dean with this go hard or go home intensity that you can't help but watch. Plus, Bobby is introduced here, and Bobby is still my favorite character in the series. There's a lot to love about Devil's Trap, so why isn't it on my list? Kripke yet again. Too much of the characters' dialogue, as was the case in the pilot, is them spewing information at each other, even stuff we already know or can easily figure out for ourselves. Kripke holds our hands to make sure we know everyone's state of mind and motivation. Plus, he did some telling versus showing with the yellow-eyed demon. We're just told Azazel considered Meg and that nameless demon Dean shot like his children, but there's not much actual text in the show to support that. If you think I ragged on Kripke too much in this video, I promise I will talk about his strengths more in the next one. Now, on to my number one. Number one. Of my number one, Eric Kripke said, and I quote, "It's when I first realized what the show was capable of. Here's this episode about, is there a God, what's meant to be, and is there free will? And is your life worth the cost of someone else's life? It's a metaphysical and moral study of the boys' universe. There's so many different places the show can go and so many tones. That's been really fun to do." Faith is not only a great episode, but a game changer. Faith was directed by Alan Croker. He only directed this one episode of Supernatural, but I have seen quite a bit of his other work. He's been a guest director on a bunch of TV shows I really love, like Firefly, Roswell, Dollhouse, and Star Trek Voyager, so that's pretty awesome. This episode was written by Sierra Gamble and Riel Tucker. These women were writing partners before Supernatural, and every episode they wrote for Supernatural's first season, they wrote together. Both of these women are very good, even occasionally great at their jobs. I said in my least favorites video that besides Hart and her lack of a bigger picture vision as a showrunner, I really like Gamble's writing on Supernatural. In terms of her other work, I've also watched Aquarius. Not a great show, I know, but it's well written and acted enough to get me to come back for next season. As for Tucker, she only worked on the show for 2 years, and then she moved on to one of my favorite TV shows of all time. I truly love True Blood and could spend hours talking about all of the things that make it kind of brilliant, but it's actually a bit hard to get a handle on any of the True Blood's writers' voices because every episode is so interconnected. Each episode starts right where the last one let off. However, there are a few scenes of the show that perfectly illustrate what it's all about, and one of them is the opening scene in Everyone Wants to Rule the World, which was written by Tucker. It has everything: the blood, the gratuitous nudity, delicious dark humor, romance, and of course a heavy-handed metaphor about religion. Which leads us back to faith. Everything about it works for me. I love the beginning, which sets up that there are cases that Sam and Dean take on that we never see, which makes the world of Supernatural feel bigger than the show itself. It also normalizes what we call amazing, saving lives from evil monsters. Sam and Dean do this every day. I love how the episode sets Sam and Dean up to have different views on God and religion. Dean's skepticism about God makes character sense in a world of mythic monsters. He believes in evil because he's seen evil and doesn't believe in good because he's seen so little of it in his life. However, Sam believes in good because if there's evil, then there has to be a force of good to balance it out. Both interesting positions that were further explored in Kripke's era. I completely love Julie Benz, who is gorgeous and amazing. I love how the question presented in the episode, is one life worth another, encourages the audience to think without giving an obvious answer. I love the surprise that it was in fact Sue-Ann, not Roy, who is behind the trading of lives, because at first she only did it to save Roy's life. What Sue-Ann did for her husband was wrong but understandable. However, she then decided it was up to her to play God, and the people she kills are those who she objects to because she's a social conservative. I think this is actually what makes Sue-Ann scarier than almost all of the villains of the season, because she's the type of monster we know actually exists. The self-righteous love to use their religion as a reason to be truly awful people. Sue-Ann's character is made all the more interesting by the fact that Sam was equally desperate to save Dean as she was to save Roy, making the episode struggle with the implications of playing God versus thinking it's entirely evil. Like I said, this episode really encourages the mind to think deeper. And of course, I also love the ending, where Sam, seeing how disturbed Dean was by all that happened, asked Layla to come and talk to Dean to give him closure, which leads to one of the most beautiful and moving endings of any episode of the entire series.
So that's it. Guess I'll see y'all for season 2. Sayonara and Auf Wiedersehen.
That's right, monorail.
Monorail, monorail, monorail. I hear those things are awfully loud.
It glides as softly as a cloud.
Is there a chance the track could bend?
Not on your life, my Hindu friend.
What about us brain-dead slobs?
You'll be given cushy jobs.
Were you sent here by the devil?
No, good sir, I'm on the level.
The ring came off my pudding can.
Take my penknife, my good man. I swear it's Springfield's only choice. Throw up your hands and raise your voice.
Monorail.
What's it called?
Monorail.
Once again.
But Main Street's still all cracked and broken.
Sorry, Mom. The mob has spoken.
Mono, don't